Okay, good evening, everyone. Welcome to our weekly parenting workshops. For those who are joining us for the first time, my name is Chennai Machinjike. I am the founder of EPAC UK. We are a parenting group supporting African parents around parenting. We have these workshops every week, discussing various topics around parenting. We have different guests who join us on a weekly basis, different professionals, different experts in different areas, all relating to parenting. Tonight, we are joined by Helen Walford, who is a temporary detective sergeant within West Midlands Police. She works within the Child Abuse Investigation Unit. I thought it would be really helpful to have Helen with us tonight, just to talk to us and help us to understand how the police conduct child protection inquiries. I know a lot of people don't usually understand how that process works and how police get involved. So just before we start, because I'm sure people will have a lot of questions, just be having a bit of mindful of Helen's time. Truly grateful that she could come and be with us today. But just if you've got any questions, put them in the chat. If you've got any anonymous questions, send them to me and I'll be happy to read them out to Helen. But also any personal questions, I think Helen will probably provide her contact details for those who might want to reach out to her with any personal questions. But just to remind people to be respectful in the questions that we ask, because Helen is giving us out her precious time tonight for us to hear from her. So over to you, Helen, and thank you so much for agreeing to be here with us tonight.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me. I'm really grateful to get this opportunity. It's not often that I get to kind of speak to people from different communities that I'm not involved in, and kind of this learning back and forth process. So thank you for having me. I really do appreciate it. It will be quite a brief presentation. There's a lot of information covered in it. This is kind of my bread and butter. It's something that I know a lot about. Whereas if I skirt over something or I say something that you don't quite understand, please feel free to pop a question in or just ask me kind of to re-explain something. Because as I say, these are things that I kind of talk about all day, every day. So it might be that I gloss over something that kind of needs a bit more expanding on. Let me just go on to my presentation if you can see it. There we go. So I'm from the Child Abuse Investigation team. We also call it the Child Protection team. Essentially because sometimes it might not be a case of abuse, it might just be that a child needs some support or needs that protection. So that's why we use both terms. Just for a bit of context, within West Midlands Police, there are 4 Kate teams. So there's ours on Edgbaston, so we cover Birmingham. There's also one on Wolverhampton and Walsall. There's the western side, which is Sandwell and Dudley, and then there's Coventry as well. Within Central, just to give you a bit of context of kind of the scale of what we're dealing with, Central has 3 child protection teams, and each team has got 15 to 20 officers, and each of them is carrying around 20 investigations. So just from my team, I work on team 2, we've got about 1,000 investigations. So as you can imagine, that keeps our officers quite busy. I'll put on here a bit of a list of the offences that we tend to deal with. This isn't all of them. Obviously, there are ones that are kind of a grey area, but these are the core of them. So that will be
Helen, you're not
yeah, can you hear me
sharing
okay?
slideshow. Yeah, we can hear you, but you're not on slideshow.
Oh, I've got the second slide. Can you not see the second slide?
I can, but it's not showing
Uh,
slideshow.
Let me try again.
Okay.
Let's have a look. Can you
Yeah,
see it
that's
now?
it. Yeah, yeah.
Lovely, got there in the end. So this is on here, hopefully you can see it now, is a list of offences that we cover. So the main one is going to be assaults on children. We deal with assaults where the perpetrator or the suspect is in a position of care or responsibility over the child. So that's going to be parents, caregivers, foster carers, teachers, anyone who has a responsibility over that child. So it isn't siblings or other children at school, it's primarily those caregivers. We also investigate sexual offences involving children. That includes children where they're a perpetrator as well as a victim of it. and it includes communications offences. So obviously with technology kind of taking such a prevalence in society at the moment, we're getting more and more of those. So those are your jobs where children may have sent indecent images online, they may have engaged in inappropriate conversations online or accessed content that isn't appropriate for them. So we will investigate those. The lesser kind of prevalent ones, we'll look at kidnap or child abduction, children who have been forced into marriage, either in this country or abroad, and also cases of child neglect. In terms of child neglect, primarily we'll be looking at home conditions that are poor. Parents or caregivers may not have been keeping up with kind of medical needs, administering treatment if necessary. But it's all around, if we're looking at neglect, is that child's day-to-day life being negatively impacted by the behaviour of the caregiver? And that's where we will start to get involved. The next slide, which I hope you can see, is the legal definition of the offence of willful assault. The thing I find interesting about this one is that the act this is taken from is from 1933. So we get a lot of comments of, you'll see obviously the wording of the offence. You'll get a lot of comments that it used to be okay 10, 20 years ago. It isn't. It's been a criminal offence since 1933. So the offence states, if a person who has attained the age of 16 years and has responsibility for a child or young person under that age willfully, so that's intentionally or recklessly, assaults, ill-treats, neglects, abandons, or exposes him, or causes or procures him to be assaulted, ill-treated, whether physically or otherwise, neglected, abandoned, or exposed in a manner likely to cause him unnecessary suffering or injury to health, that person shall be guilty of an offence. I think that's really important to put here, because I think a lot of people get caught up in what child cruelty or what child abuse actually is. It incorporates all those elements, and it incorporates intentional abuse or reckless abuse. So be it omission of behaviour, be it not doing something that you should have been doing to look after that child, that is also covered in the legislation. Whereas I think a lot of people get caught up in, they think it might just be smacking or hitting a child as a form of punishment. It's all of those things included in that wording there. So how do police get involved in these investigations? Most normal offences that other teams deal with will normally be a 999 call. We've also got another referral mechanism, which is schools, social workers, children's clubs, those kind of places may receive a disclosure from a child. So, for example, a child goes into school and speaks to the teacher, and they've got a bruise or they've got a scratch or a mark, or it might even be their behaviour's changed that day. They're not their usual kind of outgoing, bubbly self, and the teachers become concerned. They will normally take the child aside and check in and make sure that they're doing okay. And that may be where that first disclosure is made. Based on whether it's a referral or it's come from a 999 call, either way, that referral will then go through to MASH, which stands for Multi-Agency Safeguarding Hub. And essentially, they're a team who will take in all the referrals in relation to child protection matters, and they will do some intelligence checks or some information checks, find out all the parties involved. Have Birmingham Children's Trust got any previous involvement with that family? Are they the kind of family that are often coming to light, or is it kind of the first time that they've come to our knowledge? There will then be a strategy meeting, and that will be attended virtually, so on Teams, by a representative from the police, a representative from Children's Trust, and then it'll be school, hospital, any professionals who have involvement with that family and with that child. And the intention of that meeting is just to gather together and share information, because if we're just going off police information, it might be that some really useful context is missed. So, is the child often turning up to school late? Are they showing up scruffy, or are their clothes appearing dirty? Are they regularly going to hospital with illnesses or infections which could be avoided? And then obviously we've got the police checks. Are the family known to us? Have we had any previous involvement with them from a criminal standpoint? The aim of that meeting is to decide one of two outcomes. Is it to the lower level where Children's Trust can just deal with it on their own and we don't need to be involved? Or if there is a criminal aspect to it, so we believe a crime may have been committed, police will be involved, and that is called a joint Section 47 inquiry. And that just means that both parties are going to be investigating together. Once that's been agreed, that then comes through to my office. So we will ask one of our officers to liaise with children's services, arrange a joint visit to go and speak to the child. Now, I've put on there, this is the most important step because it really is. That is the first time that we get to see that child in person, see how they're presenting to us, find out a little bit more about them, and just have a chat. And whilst it's a police inquiry, it is as informal as it possibly can be. So officers will go out and speak to the child. They might be playing with toys with them or playing a game. They might kind of, get on the floor with them. And it's all about making that child feel as comfortable as possible. Move on to the next slide. So yes, it'll be open-ended questions of the child. So we don't go out and interview children at school first and foremost. This joint visit is to just fact find and find out what's been going on. It can either be led by a social worker or a police officer. We will be guided by how the child is most comfortable. And I always tell my officers, you've got to go in with an open mind with no expectations, because you might get there and the child takes an instant dislike to you and doesn't want to speak with you in the room. It may be that they absolutely love you and they want to show you what they've been doing at school that day, or they want to talk to you about the school holidays. You are guided by the child and how they are presenting to you, and you have to kind of go along with how they are engaging with you. There is no pressure applied from us to the child to say anything at all. And we do have cases where we go out and do a joint visit to speak to a child and they do not want to speak to us. That is absolutely fine, and it's understandable when you've gone in and spoken to a teacher and you've told them something that you were really nervous to tell them, and then all of a sudden, two officers and a social worker come out to speak to you at school. It can be very intimidating, as much as we try and avoid it. So there is no expectation on that child or pressure to speak if they don't feel comfortable to do so. We kind of take it as relaxed a pace as we possibly can do. The visit will normally take place at school if it possibly can. It can take place at home as long as this is appropriate. We're thinking there in terms of, is a parent or a caregiver or someone in that home someone potentially we might need to speak to involved in the investigation? So are they likely to be a suspect? If so, we will not be doing a visit at home. It will be done at school. If it's to take place at school, officers will make contact with parents and let them know that that's going to be happening. Sometimes it might be done by a head teacher at school. Sometimes it may be the officer or a social worker. But the expectation is that if parents or caregivers at home aren't involved in the allegation in any way, we should be telling you that that's going to be taking place, that we're going to come out and speak to your child in relation to an allegation that's been made, and we just need to check in with them and make sure that they're okay. The difficulty then comes with, if you are potentially a suspect or someone that we need to speak to in relation to an allegation, you won't be informed at that point. You'll be informed after we've spoken to the child. That'll make a little bit more sense when I move on to my next slide, which covers the topic of police protection. So police protection is a very long-winded way of saying we have power. If we believe a child is at risk, we can remove them from where they are. So you'll notice, where a constable has reasonable cause to believe that a child would otherwise be likely to suffer significant harm, he may remove the child to suitable accommodation and keep him there, or take such steps as are reasonable to ensure the child's removal from any hospital or other place. So what that means is, if we go to a home and we believe that that child is at risk of harm being in that home, we can remove them and put them in a place of safety for a maximum of 72 hours. It also mentions there about ensuring that they're not removed from hospital or any other place. Circumstances where we might use that are children who are in hospital awaiting medical testing and parents try to remove them from hospital. If we've police protected that child to the hospital, that then eliminates any power for the parents to remove that child. It's something that we only use in cases where we absolutely have to, and we do not take a child into police protection lightly, because it really does cause upheaval to that child. If you imagine you've gone to school like a normal day, and all of a sudden you've got many different professionals taking you from where you feel like you may be safe or may be comfortable and placing you somewhere completely different. We do not do that unless we absolutely have to and we deem it necessary. I've got a couple of examples here of where police protection might be used, just to kind of put it into a bit more of a context. So, for example, a child is alleged being subject to physical abuse by a caregiver at home. we would consider police protecting that child because returning them back to that home might potentially subject them to further risk of harm. Similarly, if we go to a home where the home conditions are neglectful, we believe that the conditions are not suitable for that child to be living in, and putting them back there will put them at further risk, we would consider police protection in that case. And again, just to cover, if a child is in hospital, we believe that potentially there may have been some foul play there or some possible signs of physical abuse of that child, and parents are very anti wanting to remove the child from hospital, we may deem it appropriate to police protect that child to the hospital. And just to put into a little bit of context, that has a power of arrest attached to it. So a parent or a caregiver or anyone who may try and remove a child who is subject to police protection can be arrested for that. And just to make sure so that child is kept where they need to be. So in terms of how the process works, the first port of call will be the officer in that situation who's looking around going, I'm not happy with this. I've got XYZ concerns. I do not feel like I feel comfortable putting this child back where in this situation. They will usually in practice ring one of the sergeants and run that situation by and say, I'm thinking of using this police protection power. They will document the exact time that that power was used. So it's a bit like when a person is arrested, we have to designate the exact time and place that it was done. So the officer will say to the relevant caregiver, parent, whoever the child is with at that point, the time is 2017 hours and I am taking this child into police protection. At that point, the police protection has started. They will then need to liaise with an inspector. So you've got the officer, then sergeant, which is my level, and then an inspector. They'll have to contact an inspector and get them to justify that decision. So they will explain what the conditions are, what the child has said to them, what their concerns are about taking the child home. And they've got to justify that decision to the inspector. They can't just make it off the cuff. There's got to be a justifiable reason for it. The inspector will then put their name to that decision and say, yes, I authorise that decision. The officer is then expected to inform Children's Trust at the earliest opportunity. 9 times out of 10, if we've done a joint visit, there's already a social worker there. But if for whatever reason officers have gone out without a social worker, the first port of call will be ringing Children's Services, because that then leads on to step 2, which is Birmingham Children's Trust then making inquiries to find a suitable place for that child to go. So as I mentioned before, it's a 72-hour power. So in that time, we've got to find, say, for example, a child was police protected now, we've got to find somewhere for them to go this evening. We've got to facilitate them getting some clothing. They may have school the next morning. We've got to make sure that they've got a school bag and work and things with them. So Children's Services or the social worker who's present at that time will need to make some inquiries. Where can that child go right now? Sometimes, unfortunately, children are placed into police stations whilst we're finding somewhere for them to go, and it really isn't ideal because police stations aren't nice places to be. But we do have cases where children are placed in police stations whilst Children's Services are trying to find somewhere for them to go. If we can, we will try and put them with a family member, a family friend, someone who is suitable, but the child knows there's that familiarity. We will usually be asked to run some intelligence checks on any person that has been identified. To say it's a family friend or a neighbour or what have you, we will be asked to run intelligence checks to make sure that they haven't got any markers of any like danger or weapons or anything like that, or any previous convictions, because the last thing we want to do is remove a child from situation A where they're at risk of harm and then immediately place them into situation B where they're also at risk of harm. So sometimes there can be a delay between a child being police protected and finding a suitable address for them to go to, simply because we're running those checks and making sure that everyone that child goes to is safe and above board. A decision to take a child into police protection is made by the attending officer, and it is theirs to rationalise. So whilst they might seek guidance from a sergeant or an inspector, it is theirs to justify. And a good thing that obviously officers have nowadays is we have body cams, so video cameras that record the situation. there might be multiple different reasons why a child is taken into police protection, but if we've got a recording of that shows home conditions, that shows injuries sustained to the child, how they're presenting to us, it kind of gives the officer a little bit of backup in terms of evidence of why they've taken that decision, but it is theirs alone to justify. And if we have a situation where further down the line someone may question that decision, it will be for them to argue why they made it in that time. So once a child is taken into police protection and a criminal offence has been alleged, what do we then do? So the first stage of there will be an investigation strategy or a suspect strategy. So what are we going to do imminently? We need to decide, are there immediate concerns which we need to address right here, right now? Or is this something where we can take our time? Is the victim safeguarded? Are there any evidential opportunities that we need to kind of rush and progress fast? So that may be things like, if there's a weapon used, we may need to search and address for that weapon. That's something we need to do quick because we need to make sure that there's no loss of evidence. If we've chased a child into police protection, do we need to arrest a suspect so that we can consider bail conditions? And that's something I'll come on to it a little bit later. But do we need to consider arrest of that person in a short time frame so that we can consider, if they are potentially released, putting bail conditions on them to protect that child? When we are dealing with suspects, perpetrators, we have to evidence why they are necessary of arrest, because the expectation is that we arrest as few people as possible. We are expected to voluntarily interview as many people because it's less intrusive. We're not kind of knocking on your door in the middle of the night and taking your liberty away. The expectation is that we will interview people on a one-on-one basis at a time that suits you, wherever we can. We only arrest people if we need to gather evidence or to safeguard vulnerable people. And we've got to, when the person gets to the custody block, we have to argue to the custody sergeant why that person is subject to arrest and kind of justify our decision making. So again, just to put that in a little bit of an example, just hopefully make a bit more sense. If we've got a victim who makes a historic allegation, so it's happened a long time ago in the past, there aren't CCTV inquiries or forensic inquiries that we're going to get because it's happened in the past. The victim is safeguarded away from the potential suspect or perpetrator. They don't know where the victim lives anymore. They've since moved away. They've got no means of contacting the victim. I would be looking at that and thinking we can perhaps put the brakes on a little bit. We can voluntarily interview that person and we can progress it in a slower scale because we don't need to be rushing. Whereas if we had a child who potentially had sustained an injury or there was some kind of imminent safeguarding concern where we needed to look at either medical treatment or kind of safeguarding of that child, and we believe that there was some evidence that required seizure imminently, that would be kind of our direction, that maybe that person needs to be subject to arrest so that we can do those things quick time. What's important to note is if for whatever reason you are subject to this process, you won't know that these conversations are obviously taking place because it's taking place in the background. So the first you may be aware that an allegation's been made against you is either a telephone call from an officer saying, I'd like you to come in and provide an account for this allegation, or unfortunately, officers knocking on your door. So you won't be subject to these conversations that are going on. Once you've been asked to provide an account, or all the individuals have provided an account, the officer will then have a list of tasks to complete, a list of inquiries. Those may be obtaining CCTV footage of an offence. It may be approaching witnesses for statements. We also review records from professionals. So have we got school records for that child? Have Children's Services got any records of previous involvement? Are there medical records that could prove or disprove this offence? And they're working to gather as much information as they can and evidence as they can before they reach a point where they say, right, I've done everything that I possibly can, now we need to make a decision. And that's where myself and the other sergeants will come in then and review everything. I almost imagine it as like a physical folder. They've gathered all the paperwork, they've given everything to me and said, right, Helen, now you have a look at the context of this. This is what the victim's saying. This is what the suspect's saying. We have or haven't got CCTV, witnesses. What are we going to do next? And we'll decide what happens from there. this is more than likely going to be a good few months process, because investigations unfortunately do take a long time. As I mentioned at the start, most investigators have got between sort of 20 and 25 crime reports that they're handling at any one time. That doesn't include abstractions where they've got to go to court, training, sickness, annual leave, those types of things. So if you can imagine, they're trying to juggle 20 to 25 of these situations at once. Unfortunately, that they can be delayed, and it can take months, in some cases years, if it's a complex investigation. So if, for whatever reason, an allegation has been made, you would be asked to provide an account, again, either voluntarily or under arrest. And that is an opportunity to give your version of events, as well as any lines of inquiry you want us to do. So if you've been accused of something that you haven't done, you have an opportunity to A, give your side of the story, and also tell the officer what they should do. So were you with an individual who can provide a statement that will say, no, I was with Helen that day, it can't possibly have happened? Are there messages from an individual that will back up your account, kind of your side of things? That is your opportunity to tell us as much as you want to tell us. And there is no limit on an interview of how long it should take. If you want us to go away and do 1,000,001 inquiries, absolutely, because it's going to help your case ultimately. Any police interview will take place at a police station, and you are legally entitled to have a solicitor present free of charge. And that is something that either you can arrange or we can arrange. We cannot advise people what to do when they're a suspect in that investigation, but I would always suggest to people to consider a solicitor, because it is free and independent legal advice. They're not kind of buddied up with the police or anything like that. They are separate to us, and they are there to protect your best interests. So if for whatever reason, hope it doesn't happen, but if any of you are involved in a criminal investigation, always seek advice from a solicitor, because they are there to look after your best interests and make sure that you are treated fairly and that you get the right outcome ultimately. When you've been interviewed and when all those inquiries have been completed, one of the sergeants will then make a decision on what happens next. If you've been interviewed voluntarily, you'll be told, right, we can finish with you. You're free to leave the station. If you've been arrested, you may be possibly charged in custody if we've got enough evidence, but it's very rare that happens. You may be released on bail with conditions attached. What that essentially means is, we aren't done with our investigation yet. We need some more time. So we're going to release you on bail with some conditions that you must adhere to. They are normally, don't go to this place, don't do that thing, don't talk to that person. Sometimes it might be, if you've got a phone, you need to register phone with us so we know what devices you've got. Don't go to a school, or all those types of things. Excuse me. So those conditions are legally binding, so you cannot break them, because if you do, oh, sorry, excuse me, frog in my throat. If you breach bail conditions, you can be subject to further arrest. So those are kind of legally binding. You shouldn't be breaking those, and if you do, you will be brought back into custody again for breach of bail. Conditions are there for a number of reasons. One, to safeguard everyone involved, but also to make sure that further allegations can't be made against you. So if we've got a condition in place, which is often the case in child protection inquiries, no unsupervised contact with a child, that may mean you can absolutely see your children, or you can see relatives or what have you, as long as there is another adult present, because that protects you from further allegations being made against you. It also means that if you're accused of anything, you can always argue, well, I was adhering to those bail conditions, there were other adults present, so I cannot have done, any further offences. And of course, it's also there to make sure that child is further protected, because there's not going to be any further offences taking place. When there's a criminal investigation, there will be an OIC allocated to it. That's just the officer in charge, the person who's investigating it, and they will be your point of contact, and you will be given their contact details. If you've got a solicitor involved and you've had them there for your interview, any questions or concerns, or you're not sure kind of what's happening, they're your best port of call, because they can filter questions through to us. But you'll have an OIC, and feel free to send them as many questions or queries or anything as you need to. It is their job to make sure not only are they progressing the investigation, but that everyone involved knows what's going on and understands the progress of the investigation and what's required of them. So it's the expectation is they are providing updates to social workers, to school, but also to suspects and perpetrators and solicitors as well, to make sure that everyone knows the status of the case at any one time. It's also really important that officers understand just the impact that the investigation can have on families. So there are often times where, as a result of a criminal investigation, we are removing children from a family. We are asking them to live somewhere else temporarily while we investigate. That is undeniably going to have a huge impact on that child, particularly around that age where they're developing and kind of there may be kind of hormonal changes or behavioral changes, those kind of things. We are subjecting them to a really difficult experience at possibly the worst time. So it's always really important for us to recognise how quickly can we progress this investigation and can we draw it to a close quicker by doing our inquiries as expeditiously as possible to try and reduce that negative impact on the family. Sometimes, unfortunately, due to the nature of an allegation or the complex nature of an investigation, it isn't possible to draw it to a close. But we will always have it in the back of our mind to try and resolve an investigation as soon as we possibly can, because we don't like taking children from families. None of us are in this job to remove children from families. What we're here to do is safeguard children and progress our investigations and get the right results in the right cases. But we do not enjoy or take any kind of enjoyment from splitting up families and dividing them. So if there are cases where maybe we've gone a little bit slower than we should have done, maybe we could be progressing something a bit faster, it's my job and the job of the other sergeants to see what can we do to speed this up. Are there any inquiries that we can task out? Is there any support that we can get from anyone else that can speed this up and get the family together? Or possibly can we look at amending bail conditions instead of saying no contact at all in some cases? Can we look at supervised contact? Is there anything that a social worker can do to facilitate that, to make sure that that family relationship is still in place and still kind of being supported whilst we're investigating? So this just goes to show you kind of all the thoughts that you've got in your mind whilst you're progressing an investigation. It isn't just work through a list of tasks that the boss has sent me and then kind of then my job is done. There's all these thoughts going through your mind at any one time. And ultimately they all come down to what's the best thing for the child. Is the best thing for the child for me to keep this investigation going on forevermore, or actually is the right thing to do to get some support in place, to maybe get some education or some support for a parent who's maybe made a mistake or an error, and putting the child back in the family and trying to support the family growing back together again and having that good family dynamic. And most of the times I would argue that is better. Once an investigation's been kind of concluded, once we've made a decision on what's going to be happening one way or the other, it should be communicated to you as soon as practicable. Obviously, the outcomes that we've got, which were discussed, are it may be that you're charged with an offence. It may be that we decide that there's no action to be taken because we haven't got enough evidence. That doesn't necessarily mean that we've decided it didn't happen. And I think a lot of people get caught up with that will say the investigation is closed and they'll say, well, that means that, that they've got positive evidence that this didn't happen. And that often isn't the case. What often happens is we may have cases where all the evidence would suggest that there is a child that's been harmed, but we do not have that threshold of evidence to submit it to the Crown Prosecution Service. And it is an incredibly frustrating job at times because you can see that there's a situation that needs some support, that needs some help, and you just can't get a good result because the evidence just isn't there. But it's about, we will have that conversation with Children's Services at that point. If we are closing an investigation, but we still have concerns, we don't just go, well, I'm wiping my hands and that's that done. We will be having a conversation with the social worker and saying, we're disengaging, but we want to make sure that you're putting the appropriate support in place for that family and making sure that we don't step away until we are satisfied that the appropriate work and support is going to be there for that family. Another outcome that we look at is something called out of court disposals. And it's a very fancy, long winded way of saying if we don't have to criminalise someone, we will try not to. So if there are situations where It may be a lower level offence. I'm not saying that anything, isn't serious, but it's on a lower level of offending. The person's been open and honest in interview and made admissions, has held their hands up and said, "Yep, I made a mistake. I lost my temper, or I didn't understand that was inappropriate behaviour, or all things like that." If we can see someone is engaging with the process, who wants some help, who clearly the offence hasn't been committed through malice, it's come through from misunderstanding, we will look to put support in place rather than criminalising that person. So we will get you to sign a document to say, "I admit that I have committed this criminal offence. However, instead of being criminalised or charged, we will direct you to a support service." So we've got a number of them at the moment. We've got one called New Chance, which looks at female offending. So there will be support sessions where female offenders can kind of engage in that support and kind of move to a better place where they're not further offending. But there are all sorts. There's ones for like drug rehabilitation, driving, lots of different ones. The reason why I mention it here is because I'm looking at one at the moment to see what kind of support we can offer for the African community, just to see if there are any mistakes that are being made or kind of errors in judgment which are in relation to maybe a different understanding or a cultural difference. Is there something that we can put in place to better support you rather than criminalising you? Because I don't think we should be criminalising people for making a mistake based on a misunderstanding. If it's been done in malice, if it's been done with wrong intentions, then absolutely that's what the law is designed for. But if there are cases where we can argue, do you know what, you've been open and honest with us, you've held your hands up and said, yeah, I accept that I did something I shouldn't have done, and I want to kind of amend my behaviour and learn what to do next time. In those situations, we will look to direct you to support rather than criminalisation. I just think that's important to mention here because I think a lot of people come to interviews, particularly around child offences, and absolutely panic at the thought that they are going to be going through the criminal justice system or children are going to be taken away. Whereas actually, if you're open and honest with us and if you've made a mistake, if it's been an error of judgment, just have that conversation with us and be honest about it. And we will always, wherever we can, look to direct you to the support option rather than criminalisation. But it's just about having that kind of confidence or that reassurance, I suppose, that we're all, the officers who are interviewing you are human beings, and we understand that people make mistakes and sometimes we get things wrong. We can see in a person whether someone's done something out of malice or whether they just don't understand and they need that bit of help. But absolutely, if you are ever interviewed and you are kind of having that battle of, well, if I tell the officer they're not going to understand, it may be that we don't understand the specifics of what you've done or the specifics of the cultural aspect of it because it's a different culture to ours. Take the time to tell us, explain it to us why you've taken a particular course of action and why you've done that behaviour, and we will have that conversation with you around maybe there's some support in place that we can put you forward for rather than going down the criminal justice route. It's something, as you can tell, I'm very passionate about. So hopefully that's something that we can kind of increase in West Midlands Police and get more kind of organisations involved in those out of court disposals. But again, the takeaway from that, I would say, is if you're interviewed and you've done something that's like a mistake or an error, just be open and honest about it. And we're all human beings. Finally, I'm coming back to something that I think is really important for West Midlands Police. It's the race action plan. So this is a pledge from West Midlands Police about how we intend to improve our relationship with Black people within the West Midlands Police community. And it makes multiple pledges of improvement. I think the interesting thing for me when reading this, and you should be able to find this on the West Midlands Police website. If you can't, I'll see if I can forward it out to Chennai for an email. But basically, it's an action plan. It doesn't try and say that we're getting it right. It says, what do we intend to do to get better, to improve the service that we're giving to our communities? So as you can see, it's got multiple different threads in there. So recruitment and retention, engaging with members of the community around integral elements, inviting viewpoints to be shared, asking people to be open and transparent with us being open and transparent in return about how we're managing investigations. Are we getting the right outcomes? Are we kind of being fair across the board? And are we making sure that every investigation, every person is treated fairly? He also pledges to ensure every officer in the force engaged with the Black History training. So that's been going on for a number of months now. And it's kind of a mandatory training that officers are asked to attend to understand the history of how West Midlands Police has treated not only Black people, but other communities that we are currently serving, to understand why there may be kind of animosity towards us, why it might be that we're not trusted by a lot of different communities. Understanding that context is really important for us now to understand what work do we now need to do to get to a much more positive place. An integral part of the pledge is our agreement to engage, listen, and take on feedback from communities which may have different views and lived experiences. And we can't do that on our own. We can't do that as an isolated entity. So if you have an opportunity to give feedback to West Midlands Police, be it positive or negative, please do engage with us, as it will help us change for the better. The West Midlands Police Force area is a huge, culturally diverse area. And in order for us to grow and improve, we need to engage in challenging and difficult conversations, and also address those occasions where we do get it wrong. And we absolutely do get it wrong. A lot of times it's not from officers having ill intentions or wanting to upset communities, but it's just because we don't know any better. So if there are opportunities where we as a force can improve, absolutely send them our way and we will engage in them wholeheartedly. So hopefully that you found that kind of whistle-stop tour of police investigations useful. Hopefully you won't ever have to cross paths with any of us, hopefully. But if you do, I hope that from what I've said to you today, that you feel confident that you could be open and honest about differences between the different cultures, and that if you need support, that you're accepting of it. So hopefully if you are ever asked to kind of engage with an interview, or you're ever spoken to by the police, just be open and honest and give that feedback as much as you possibly can. Because if we can, there are obviously lots of ways that West Midlands Police can improve, but we can't do it on our own. So we need your help really with that. So I've put my contact details on there. You've got my email and my landline. I work odd shifts. So if you ever want to give any kind of feedback or questions or thoughts of anything, feel free to send me an email, and I will get to you when I'm back on duty. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed my presentation. If you've got any questions, obviously just fire away.
Yeah. Oh, thank you so much, Helen. That was really, really good. We do have a few questions in the chat which I'll reach out, but I just wanted to make a couple of comments based on your last slide,
Yeah.
which is how positive it is that we've got visibility from West Midlands Police, or the police in general, in terms of making those connections with the community. As you said, there is a lot of lack of trust. There is a lot of concerns around racism, particularly around the treatment of young Black boys within the system. And I think that's an area that I think I mentioned to you that I've got one of your colleagues coming to talk to us about that in the next couple of weeks. But there is a lot of fear from the Black community. So it is really positive when we have people come to talk to us directly and give us the opportunity to ask those questions directly. So one of the questions in the chat is, I think you mentioned about common female offenses, and someone's asked, what are those common female offenses?
Oh, female offence. Oh no, female offenders. So
Offenders, yeah.
yeah, that there aren't common female offences.
Um,
No, it's just if we're directed or encouraged that these out of court disposals should be used whenever they possibly can.
mm,
New Chance is one of the ones that we're kind of engaged with at the moment for female offenders, just to get them that further support.
mm,
But there aren't any specific offences that kind of pertains to. It's any
mm,
offences really, as long as it's a first time offence
yeah,
and they engage with us and want that support. We don't tend to put people through for out of court disposals or kind of any further support unless they're engaging with it. So that's why I say if support's being offered to people as a result of any police involvement, engage with it.
Yeah.
attend sessions if you're kind of directed in that sense, ask those questions, reach out for support, because if we and other professionals can see that you want that help, then we'll send it to you in spades.
Yeah. And it's really important that you've mentioned that you are considering the out of court disposals, especially for things relating to parenting as well. As you already mentioned, there is a lot of cultural factors in parenting, and I think that's an area where a lot of African parents struggle to reconcile with how the law works in this country. There will be a question, someone's asked a question around that, but I'll ask. In relation to cultural differences, what is coming up from people you are working with at the moment that's in relation to the African community? Are there sort of themes coming up?
I think a lot of it is around physical chastisement. So we get a lot of cases where we may interview parents around physical chastisement, punishing children with implements and things like that. And there are those kind of those common themes.
Yeah.
The difficulty is uh, if it's not being admitted to an interview, we can't engage in that further support. Well, that's why I'm quite kind of vocal about, if you're open and honest with us and you say, look, this is something that I was brought up with, this is something that I believed all my life that was acceptable in my community, and I'm now in a new country where that isn't acceptable, and I'm finding it hard to kind of come up to speed with the legislation in the UK, that is understandable to a degree, because you're taking on a whole new culture. But the
Mhm.
difficulty is when people don't feel the confidence to have those difficult conversations, particularly when we're being interviewed. A lot of people will be advised by solicitors to just not respond, to just say nothing at all. It leaves us in a really vulnerable position because we can't really refer you for that further support. Whereas
Yeah.
if people are just open and honest and say, look, I've got it wrong, I believe that this was okay, but it clearly isn't, then we could engage in that further support. And ultimately, we're going to get a better resolution. The
Yeah.
parents are going to understand more about what is and isn't appropriate, and the children are going to benefit. And ultimately, that's why we're here. We want the children to have a better standard of life. So if we can engage in anything that kind of gets that as the end result, that's what we want to be doing.
And we talk about that a lot on this platform. Ignorance is not an excuse. So if you
Yeah,
genuinely didn't know any better, then you own up to it. It's an opportunity to learn, isn't it? And everybody
definitely.
makes mistakes, and that's what we're always talking about. Someone's mentioned, and this is, I think, something that I mentioned when we were speaking before, is are there any plans or is there anything in place to teach new migrants arriving in the UK about child protection and safeguarding, like a mandatory training on arrival? I think that's
I
a more
don't think there.
question for the Home Office.
Yeah, that's a big question for me to answer. I
Yeah.
don't know that there is at the moment. I mean, it's certainly worth a conversation, particularly with ourselves and with Birmingham Children's Trust, around kind of how we would implement that and what it would look like. But I agree, it's definitely something that's got a lot of value to looking into. I'll take that away from this meeting and see if I can have a chat with Birmingham Children's Trust about kind of how that would work. But
Yeah.
yeah, definitely worth kind of investigating a bit further.
Yeah. And it's certainly an area that you could link in with community groups, isn't it? And there just
Definitely.
needs to be a mechanism of referring those families that are arriving, whether it be through doctor surgeries or schools, because usually those are the first point of contact for new families arriving. And whether there's a mechanism through that of signposting those families for information. And of course, if someone's signposted, they've not taken that advice and support, and then something happens, they don't really have a leg to stand on, do they?
Yeah.
Yeah, right. And right, so we have a feedback form in the chat. Please do fill it in for those who are able to. It would really be useful to find out how useful you found this session, and also helps, as I always say, for us to find out what areas that you need support with and other guests to invite in future. Someone's asked, is smacking allowed, or it's a completely no-no?
Complete no. And I still find this very strange because I'm only 31 and I can remember being smacked as a child. So it's not that long ago, but it isn't. It's absolute no. Any physical chastisement or even threats to do so is a criminal offence.
Mm.
Unfortunately, like I say, it's the bulk of our work. Most of our reports will be a parent has got angry and they've hit a child either with their hand, like smacking, or unfortunately sometimes it is with implements, but it is all an absolute no. It is a criminal offence. And obviously there are layers to that. There are um, more low level or they're more serious assaults, but they are all willful assaults. And as the wording of the offence says, it's either reckless, whether you've acted in a way that has recklessly caused a child to be injured, or whether you've physically done that intentionally yourself. It doesn't matter. It's still within that offence, and it is still a crime. Um, but again, if we have parents who say, look, I've just been really flustered, I've lost my temper, I've got to the end of my rag, it was a really stressful day and I've made a mistake and I want to engage. Again, it's not an excuse, but if it is that we can see, do you know what, this parent is really at the end of their tether here, can we do something with children's services to offer some support for them in terms of managing maybe challenging behavior, or are they overwhelmed? Do they need some engagement? Do they need kind of a break? Then yeah, obviously we'd have a look at that over criminalisation every day. But yes, any kind of physical discipline or punishment is a crime, and it would fall under willful assault.
Yeah. And emotional harm is a big area that we talk about that a lot of people don't really fully understand. And for example, the use of threats is really emotional harm to a child. And that's a big area that we talk about. Someone's mentioned, which is a slightly similar question, where do you draw the line between discipline and abuse?
That's a difficult one because the law will say any physical harm to that child is an assault. Of course, there's context within that. So, like I say, we we don't just deal with the incident in isolation. There's always a context to it. So we have cases where children might have been assaulted, but it's as a result of parents trying to stop them from harming themselves, stopping them from running out in the road or hurt, burning themselves or anything like that in the home. There is context to everything. So if you are accused of an assault on a child and there is context to it, that is key. Um, it's very difficult to put a line on abuse because one physical assault could be abusive. It all depends on the context around it, um, how that child's been treated. Otherwise, are what are the conditions in the home like? Are they being fed and looked after appropriately? Are they being, like you say, emotionally abused? Is there any kind of isolation from family members, or are they kept away from the rest of the family? So I'd say to answer that, there isn't really a line, but I'd say context is key when
Mm.
looking at is it a one-off incident where something's gone horribly wrong, or is it a pattern of abuse? That's kind of my officer's job, to kind of piece together the puzzle and figure out the story around the incident and not just the incident in isolation.
Yeah. We have a lot of thank yous in the chat, Helen, from people who found the session really, really helpful. Guys, I am just going through the comments in the chat. However, if anyone feels that they just want to ask a question, please feel free to unmute or raise your hand, virtual hand. It's absolutely fine. You can ask the questions directly. Someone's commented that it's really good that we're having this connection between the Black community and the police as well. They're finding that really good. And then someone's asked, is there a way we can be given a chance for officers to first understand what would have transpired before treating one as guilty and putting their names and prints into the system, such as by the time they are proven innocent, reputationally, at times is irreversible damage would have been done. The damage would have been done to both parents that is being classed as abusers and to the children who have been removed from home. The psychological impact lasts. And that's a very packed question.
Yes, there's a lot,
Because
there's a lot to unpick
there
there.
are so many elements to it, which I totally get because this is something that we talk about. A lot of the families that I've worked with, I'm just expanding your question. Sorry, I'm not hijacking it so that Helen can just answer in one because I had that written down as well. A lot of the families that have reached out to me, a lot of the time, once the allegation is made, of course, safeguarding the child is first and foremost. However, the police, in that moment, a lot of the families I support are in the health and social care industry. So a lot of the times the police are already referring to the employers or speaking to the employers, letting them know what's happened. They are being suspended. Some of them, they're actually losing their jobs as well. And by the time the police have finished their investigation and take no further action, a lot of the families are on health and social care visas. So their legal stay in the UK is tied to their visa. So there is then a lot of impact on these families. And I suppose that's where this question ties in.
Mm.
Can they sort of um, understand what's happened before? What element of the child's voice? Because that's one of the things that the parents don't understand. Why is child's voice so much taken more seriously than the parent's voice? And a lot of parents don't sort of understand that.
Mm. That's a very complex question, and
It
there's a
is.
lot of kind of elements to it. So I'll go back to kind of how it works from an officer's perspective. So if we've got a report that's been made, a child's made a disclosure about a parent, let's say for this scenario, we yes, there's an element of innocent until proven guilty, and we won't be sitting there going, well, that's the case closed. There's obviously a lot of moving parts to it. If a child has made a disclosure, we have to treat it as seriously as it is. We've got to take it on face value and go on the assumption that this has happened until proven otherwise. Because ultimately, we've got a duty to that child to listen to what they're saying. And we get cases sometimes where the disclosure that a child has made, you're hearing it thinking, oh, hang on, there's already bits of that that maybe don't make sense, or they're saying something's happened that can't have happened in the way that they're describing it. And you've already got those questions in the back of your mind, questioning the disclosure. We've got a duty to that child to act appropriately to that disclosure. And that means getting everyone's perspective. So that's why we do these joint visits. We want to understand what the child is saying to us and the context around it. And then we will be looking to get everyone's accounts. So if it's an account against a parent, we will ask that parent to attend that interview. At no point have we decided that person is guilty straight off. It just doesn't happen that way. We are evidence gatherers at that point. We are gathering all the information to make an assessment on will it reach court. We're not trying to decide has this happened or not, which I get might be a bit of a strange concept for people, but we're not in the job to decide straight away innocent or guilty. That's for the courts to determine. We're trying to decide how much evidence is there of this offence. In terms of why people are listed as suspects, unfortunately, that's just the nature of our systems, and our policy is that if you are named as potentially a suspect in that report, you will be on our kind of reporting system listed as a suspect. If for whatever reason we get positive evidence that proves that you are not a suspect, we've got the wrong person, or the victim might say, no, it didn't happen, I've made a false allegation, that will be documented on our system, and that comes up on DBS. So if you have a DBS check for a job, let's say, you will not just be listed against the offence, because a lot of people get wrongly accused of things. Let's say, there's a dispute between two people. We do have, unfortunately, reports where people make false allegations to the police in order to get someone in trouble. And unfortunately, it's just the nature of things at the moment. However, DBS is a little bit more kind of, there's a grey area to it. It's not a case of that person is listed on a report, so therefore they've been charged. If you're looking at visas or kind of jobs, there is a grey area, and the person will look, say, okay, well, yes, they were linked on this report, but what was the outcome of that? Right, it was no further action taken, or they were removed as a suspect. So there is that kind of grey area in the middle. But I do recognise just how difficult it can be if you're listed on a report as having potentially been named as an abuser of children, and you know that absolutely hasn't happened, and you just want to get your side across. I would say engage with the process as much as possible. If as soon as the police make contact with you, the soon first you're aware that there's an investigation, you come forward and say, I want to give my side of the story, I want to give my account, and you're engaging with the process, we can see that. Like I say, the officers are human beings and they can get that sense from you that you just want to get your side across. The difficulty we have is where people don't provide an account, where people don't want to speak to us, don't want to provide their side of the story, then we're only left with what the child has told us. But it absolutely isn't a case of as soon as the allegation is made, we've already made an assessment that the person is guilty. Absolutely not. We are evidence gatherers, and we will gather evidence to the pro to say that the offence has happened, or negatively, and we will often close reports not long after they've been opened because we've quite quickly recognise that either it hasn't happened or there's evidence to suggest the contrary, or we just don't have the evidence to back it up. But I really do recognise just how difficult that must be, that you're listed on a report as having done something, and then all of a sudden the police disengage and say, well, we've closed our investigation, so that's that. And you're left to pick up the pieces thinking, I've been accused of one of the worst possible things here, and there's no way of me kind of clearing my name. The interview process and that part of it is the opportunity for you to get your side of the story across, so engage with it as much as you possibly can.
Okay, thank you. Tambu, I'm just seeing a couple of hands up. Tambu, before I go on with the questions.
Thank you so much, Helen. I don't know, I can't see myself. Sorry, my thing is playing out. Thank you so much for everything. It was very, very insightful. It's always good to get a police perspective of the things that are happening within our community. For me, I think what I want to know is, you're in the Midlands. In terms of what you're talking about, is this nationally being implemented nationally? Because what we are finding is probably some areas like the Midlands, there is a lot of diversity. But I come from an area where we don't have diversity, where probably within the local authority itself, there is no understanding of anti-racist practice as well. So we've got probably the police officers and the social services where they don't understand a lot of anti-racist practice. So I think what I wanted to know is, one, is this implemented nationally where we have anti-racist training? And when you do the anti-racist training, do you also get training around biases, microaggressions? I think these are the things that come into play, because when you look at, I'll probably ask again about statistics, whether you've got any statistics around how, you're treating Black people, because without statistics, it's very difficult to measure what you're doing, whether that's all right or whether you're making any difference, because sometimes we know that Black people are overrepresented in the social services, and we know that sometimes they are not understood. I get your point where you said you can explain, but sometimes they're not given even an opportunity to explain themselves, so they can't. And sometimes we've got trauma as well, because when we come into the country, are told, amongst our community, that the way people are treated, and some of us, we've seen how Black families are treated. And sometimes some of these issues can be historical. So a child can say, I was hit by my parents, or they went to school and said something. Before you know it, it's gone, out of proportion, without really looking at, this is probably historical. And again, my next question is, how do you deal with that as well? If it's something that happened 2 years ago, do you then give that parent a caution, or what do you do with it, something that it happened 2 years ago? So I've got lots of questions, but
don't have all night,
I'll stand here, yeah. But just to give a brief overview on the support that you can give. Somebody was asking, is there any way that they can be educated? I've worked in a children's center in the past where if there is a family that comes and they've got children that are below the age of 5, a health visitor would go and visit them. Or, once they are registered, there were leaflets that were given to the children's center, then would go and visit those families and talk about the laws of the country, children's services, social services, all that. So that's something that can be implemented with working with community groups and also other resources that come into play.
There's loads to address there.
I know. Sorry.
No, they're all good questions. Just in terms of the last bit that you touched on around a support leaflet, I think that's a really useful idea. I think that's something that me and Chennai could pick up on, because obviously that's something that BCT and EPAT UK could look at implementing for professionals, that when we're coming across families from the African community that don't understand the laws and legislation, there will be a way of putting it in an easily digestible format to say, just so you're aware, this is the different culture that you've kind of entered into, and these are the expectations, that you understand our laws and kind of how to work within those. So I think that's something really useful that we could definitely kind of pick up on in a separate conversation. You mentioned around kind of anti-racism kind of training in other forces. The difficulty is I won't be able to comment on any of the forces because I've only kind of had involvement with ours. What I would say is, if you're seeing inappropriate behaviour or microaggressions or families who aren't being treated appropriately, call it out. And that goes for other forces as well as West Midlands Police. If you see something that you think isn't okay, an officer hasn't acted sensitively or appropriately, call it out. Make a complaint if you need to. But I would be kicking up a stink about that, because otherwise we won't improve. And in terms of things like our action plan is reliant on the force putting out that direction, making that pledge to the community, saying what they want to see, but it's also just as reliant on officers engaging with it and taking on the support, taking on the learning and changing their behaviour. And unfortunately, just like we've seen in the media, there will be officers who don't take on that support, don't want to change and act appropriately. That's unfortunately why we have our kind of standards process in place. But if there are officers who aren't acting as they should be on visits, aren't speaking to families appropriately, aren't being culturally sensitive, then that needs to be called out, because they don't have a place in the police force as far as I'm concerned. But I don't know about other forces kind of anti-racist training. They should be having something in place, because it should be a nationwide rollout. All I know is that it's something that West Midlands Police have kind of put forward and been working on a lot of rungs up the ladder further than me. But I wouldn't be able to comment on other forces, but it should be something that is kind of directed, that every force has to have a plan in place. You mentioned about a historic report about chastisement from kind of several years ago. It's difficult without having all the context, but I would say off the cuff, if a report was to come through to me where a child said they were potentially smacked or chastised a couple of years ago, you're going to struggle there to get it to a level of court. That's where we're always looking at, is this matter going to go to court or not? And immediately I'm thinking, well, there won't be any injury or any marks or anything like that. No one will have seen it, and it was several years ago. I'm thinking more along the routes of, we'd probably come out to parents and give some words of advice, just some explanation of kind of what's appropriate and what isn't appropriate. Is there any support that we can put in place for you? And just kind of a bit of a telling off, really, but it wouldn't go much further than that. That is something that we utilise a lot more than I think people recognise. A lot of times, if there's a first time report. It's very low level. It's clearly just a misunderstanding, or there just needs to be a bit of a kind of a stern words of advice around don't do that again. We utilize that in the background a lot more than people realize. And I will often ask officers, just go out and have a chat with his family, make sure that there's no kind of glaring concerns, that everything seems above board. And if that is the case, just make sure that they're aware that this isn't appropriate. And should it happen again in the future, that will be documented on our systems to say, well, you were told several years ago that you can't engage in that behaviour, and yet you've come to our attention again. So clearly you're not getting the message. But in terms of a historic report, if a child, we do have cases where children will go to school and make a disclosure, and depending on the age, obviously sometimes it's difficult to understand context for what they're saying. It may just be mummy hit me or something as simple as that. If we then find out later down the line from speaking to that child again that it's historic, it wouldn't go much further than, so like I say, those words of advice. It wouldn't sort of be, progressing much further. But we do have cases where disclosures evolve and change, but it's just, again, especially when it's much younger children, and it's difficult to kind of get a clear disclosure from them. But we have to work with what we've got. And we do have jobs where a child may say, mummy's hit me, daddy's hit me, or what have you. You do a bit further digging, the officer builds that rapport with the child, gets them to feel a bit more comfortable, and it turns out that it might have been part of a game, it could have been play fighting, it could be something that they've seen on telly and they've just kind of got themselves confused. But we will make sure that those conversations are taking place throughout the investigation. And as soon as we reach a point where we think, right, okay, this isn't what we initially thought it was, then of course we change our investigative tact. We don't just stay on one track if the evidence suggests that this isn't actually what we thought it was. But we're always guided by what the child is telling us. I hope that answers your questions.
You're on mute. You're on mute.
Oh,
sorry. Yeah, it does. I think you've covered most of the things that I was going to ask. I was asking. So that's good. Thank you. I'll leave others to ask now.
Yeah. I was gonna say, guys, try and keep your questions short because I'm just mindful of the time.
Because my details are on there. So if anyone thinks of anything after that they want to pop me an email or give me a call or anything, obviously feel free to do so.
All right. Christabel, we still have a few questions in the chat. I might, if we don't manage to cover all of them, I might put them together, Helen, and email them to you, and maybe you can respond, and then I can share with the people that have asked those questions.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Christabel.
Yes. So I just wanted to find out, it's a very scary process when parents are called by the police and they ask that, we want to have an interview. There's also challenges of maybe understanding information. Like, what support is put in place, and can parents request to have like an advocate to support them during the interview?
So I'll answer that in two ways. First off, in terms of making sure that when we approach people, they understand the process, that is an expectation on each individual officer. So when I used to do it, I used to have a simplified document that I gave to people. I would ring them up and explain that you're being asked to come to a voluntary interview, or, we need to speak to you to get an account. Give them an opportunity to ask questions, try and explain things in as simplified a way as possible, and provide a point of contact, because most of the time I would ring people up, invite them for an interview, and then they'd have 5 or 10 other questions because they were so flustered and so nervous about speaking to police that they didn't ask where the interview was, or they haven't written down what day. So I'm totally sympathetic to the fact of, we ring people up and we ask them, you've been accused of a crime, and we ask them to come to a date and time, and they probably haven't taken in most of that information. So I think it's an onus on each individual officer to make sure they're approaching it in the right way, wording it in the right way, and making sure that the person feels that they can ask questions if they don't understand what's been explained to them, because it is a complicated process. There's a lot of moving parts to it. Do you want a solicitor present? You're going to be subject to an assessment to make sure that you're fit to be interviewed, date and time. You're not going to be told the allegation in advance, so you're going to be kind of giving it on the day. So you're probably racking your brain trying to figure out what it is that you've done, that you've been interviewed for. So again, the expectation for me is the officer needs to be explaining it in a way that makes sense, that's devoid of police jargon and technical terms, explains it to you in a way that is palatable, and gives you the opportunity to ask questions if you need to, if you don't understand what's been explained. In terms of an advocate, you can have a solicitor present. You can also have an interpreter. The difficulty is if you're an adult and you haven't got any kind of communication needs or anything, you wouldn't be able to have another person in the interview with you. However, I would always advocate for people having a supporter in the station with them. So if you are kind of invited to a voluntary interview and you think, I need someone there for emotional support, I need someone to come out and talk to if I'm kind of having a panic, you can have someone present that you can come out to, and kind of you can take as many breaks in that interview as you need to. Just say, look, I'm getting a bit overwhelmed. I'm going to take 5 minutes. I'm going to go out and see whoever it is that you've brought with you. That's absolutely fine. The difficulty comes when you're actually in the interview, because the only people who should be present in that interview room and engaged in that interview should be the officer, the perpetrator, the suspect, whoever's being interviewed, and then you've got solicitor and potentially an interpreter if they're needed. If you're under 18, you would also have an appropriate adult present. So that would potentially be a social worker or a family member, just someone to aid communication. But in terms of if you're an adult and there aren't those communication needs there, you wouldn't unfortunately be able to have an advocate in the interview room with you. What I would say is if there's particular reasons why that might benefit you, have a conversation with the officer. So even though these things are, this is the policy, we don't have anyone in the interview room, sometimes things are subject to kind of that wiggle room, that grey area. So particularly when we're interviewing children, the policy is you shouldn't have anyone present in the interview room who doesn't need to be there. But if you've got a child who won't speak unless mum's in the room, who needs a bit of emotional support, just someone there to kind of hold a hand every now and again, that's a conversation, and we'll figure out, is there a grey area where actually that would be okay? So whilst the answer is in a very long-winded way, no, have that conversation with your officer. If you're being approached for a voluntary interview and you think, do you know what, I do want to speak to you, I do want to engage in this process, but I'm going to struggle with XYZ element, is there any way that I can have someone present? If you've got a decent officer who's receptive to kind of that conversation, absolutely have it. And if you don't feel like you can have that conversation and you don't feel like your views are being heard, feel free to escalate it. That officer will have a sergeant, have a conversation with the sergeant. And if it was me, I'd be saying, unless there's an absolute reason why not to have an advocate, then yeah, I'd be agreeing it. But it's all about those kind of grey areas of having those conversations, arguing why you think you would need them there, and kind of hopefully you've got a receptive person on the other end who can kind of understand and be sympathetic. Hopefully that's answered the question in a long-winded way.
Someone's asked if you will kindly come back for part 2 because I
Absolutely.
think there is a lot of questions that people want to ask, but obviously the time's not on our side. Someone's asked, what is the frequency of cases being referred to your department from within our community, from our community?
That's a difficult one. I'd say they're in the minority. I don't think, as I say, most officers have got between sort of 20 and 25 caseload, and they won't all have one where there's any relevant party from the African community. So it isn't kind of at the forefront, kind of prevalent. It's kind of it comes up every now and again. But then that's part of the challenge, I think, for our officers, is because they're not directly involved with the community that often. When we do have cases where it's a core issue, if they've not experienced or spoken to anyone from the African community, they've not come across these themes before, the onus is on them to ask the questions and to kind of get that perspective. But my hope is that by engaging with kind of these kind of talks, that I can gain that knowledge and that understanding, and we can have these conversations, and I can kind of filter that back to my team. But it isn't often, I would say. Maybe 5 in every kind of in the team. Obviously they've all got 15 officers, 20-25 reports each. I'd say at the moment we've maybe got about 5, between 5 and 10.
I suppose from our perspective, 1 is too many. because
Absolutely.
within our community, it feels like there's a lot.
Yeah.
But then I suppose we are more closely connected. So obviously, if it happens to one person, we all feel it as a community. And there are a lot of questions around Black boys. Someone's put questions around stop and search. Someone's put a comment about really worrying about their child who looks a lot older than their age. They're concerned about stereotyping and stuff. I don't actually know. I'm also mindful of the time, whether that's a question within your area, or maybe you could maybe recommend someone from West Midlands Police that can come and talk to us specifically around that area, because I think that's something that comes up a lot. I have someone that I work with closely that works with young Black boys in prisons. And that's quite a big area of concern for a lot of parents. The issues around drugs, gangs, county lines, knife crime, that's another question that's been asked. So I don't know, obviously, there's quite a number of questions around that within the chat. And I don't know, obviously, if that's your area, or maybe you could.
It wouldn't be, but I've made a note of it. There's a couple of topics there. I will definitely be able to go away and find out who's the best person to kind of bring in,
Yeah.
and then I'm happy to kind of refer them on to yourselves. And I'm happy as well to engage in further with these conversations, just to
Yeah.
engage that learning. But there'll definitely be someone who's kind of a field expert in those topics. So leave that with me. I've made a note, and I'll kind of figure out who's going to be the best person to invite and have that conversation with them. But yeah, they're all really good points. Definitely due a conversation.
And someone else has put a question, and I know you've already kind of touched up on this, but there's a couple of people that have liked the comment. So I imagine they want a bit more clarity. Can you explain that NFA, no further action by police, does not mean that children's services will not do their own inquiries? Because a lot of parents don't kind of understand that.
So we're both acting as separate entities at the same time. So when it's a joint investigation, we're investigating the criminal element of it. Have we got enough evidence to take the matter to court? Children's services are looking at what support can we put in place, how can we help the family to get where they need to be, and it's more of a support element. They might end their involvement well before the criminal investigation comes to an end. And similarly, the other way, we have investigations where we close the investigation because there isn't the evidence, but actually the family needs some further support. So children's services will maintain that engagement. It is a bit complicated because we arrive for that joint visit together and we're both working alongside each other, but then we are both on kind of separate train tracks, if you like, and we work independently of each other and we rely on each other. And there might be inquiries that we conduct together. There might be kind of teams meetings where we're sharing information. Well, this is where the criminal investigation's at. These are my concerns. What can you tell me about this? And then social workers engage from their aspect. But it is definitely two separate entities, both with a different end goal in mind, but working alongside each other. And it can then mean, unfortunately, that whilst the police criminal investigation draws to a close for whatever reason, that's from an evidential perspective. It doesn't mean that we don't feel that the risk is there or there's still concerns within that family setup. So those are the times when I would be having a conversation with children's services and saying, look, we are closing the criminal investigation, but I'm still really worried about this family. Please, can you reassure me that when I close my case, there is still going to be this support and input from yourselves? It's two separate entities working alongside each other.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's really important for parents to understand, that just because the police have taken no further action doesn't mean the case is done where it comes to safeguarding, because the thresholds are very different.
Yeah.
Someone's asked a really good question. I'm going to try and make this one your last question, because I'm just mindful of the time. Can you report a case of a 26-year-old man having sexual relations and sharing nudes of a 17-year-old girl? Then can it be a crime for a 17-year-old boy to have sexual relations with a 15-year-old girl? I say this is a really important question because of the age of the girl, because this is a question that has come up where even men as old as in their 40s are having relationships with 17-year-old girls, and parents have reported to the police, and the police have sort of said they're the age of consent.
Yeah,
and than anything.
there's a difficult grey area there because, yes, a 17-year-old is a child, but the age of, I think a lot of people get confused around the age of consent. So between 13 and 16, you can legally consent, which obviously you are still a child, but in the eyes of the law, you can legally consent to sexual activity. So the first one I think you said was a 26-year-old man sending nudes to a 17-year-old, was it?
Yeah, sharing nudes with a
Yeah.
17-year-old, yeah.
I would still, even if it doesn't meet a particular offence, I would still always go on the grounds of report it, because we don't know whether the 17-year-old is kind of complicit in that behaviour, whether it's unwanted contact. We don't know whether there's other people that person is messaging. That is something that's kind of raising alarm bells for me. I would be referring that into us on 101. Give the call handler all the information, and then let us kind of see where it goes in terms of a criminal offence. Is it a safeguarding issue where we need to have some involvement with that 17-year-old and it doesn't make its way to court, or is there a criminal offence? Again, with the second one, was it a 17-year-old male with a 15-year-old girl?
Well, yeah.
Yeah, that would be a crime report that would make its way to my department. So even though a 15-year-old can consent to sexual activity, we would be having that conversation just to make sure that they understand what it is that they're kind of engaging in. But that would be a criminal offence. Even though the ages are quite close, that would still be a criminal offence that would come into our department. It wouldn't be kind of looking at the offence of rape, because I think a lot of people get caught up in, if it's with a child, it's that offence. That would be sexual activity with a child, but it again would be an offence that we would investigate. So absolutely, in both of those cases, I would be reporting them into 101, and a crime number will be taken out, and then it will make its way to the relevant department to progress. But yeah, both of those definitely.
I think from an African parent's perspective, culturally, you never stop being a child to your parents. And really, from a cultural perspective, a 17-year-old is a baby.
Yeah.
And
yeah,
a lot of parents really struggle with that, and they feel so powerless as well. So that can be a real area of struggling. And I think in a lot of the times, that's where you then find things can escalate in those situations between the parent and the child as well. Last comment, or I don't know if it's a question. In some cultures, eye contact is disrespectful. Are officers aware of this when interviewing? And I think it goes back to the cultural competence and the anti-racist stuff. The body language, cultural differences, how do you take into account of these differences, especially for new migrants? As here in the UK, it may indicate distrust.
That's an interesting one, because from my personal perspective, because obviously I've interviewed people before I became a sergeant, it wasn't a consideration, I'll be honest, in terms of eye contact. It might be there's a lack of knowledge for me there. That's something that I'm going to have to go away and look into. In terms of body language, I think that is something that maybe we overlook. I think officers are just rushing from thing to thing to thing, and they'll go into an interview and just get it done, and they probably don't even think about their body language or how it could be insensitive to people from another culture. So it's definitely something that I've not considered before. I imagine most of my officers wouldn't have thought about it, but I appreciate it being brought to my attention, and it's something that I'll go away and have kind of a read up on. But to be honest, I imagine most officers know, because you're rushing around so much and dealing with one thing to the next, that I don't think it's something that would enter into your head, and it should be, because if we're talking about microaggressions and kind of, not being sensitive to other cultures, and we're doing these things without even realizing, that's something that we need to be looking at. Yeah, I appreciate that being brought to my attention, definitely.
That is definitely in a huge area, even in social work. We talk about this all the time, particularly where, and I suppose it's relevant to the police who are doing child protection interviews, where it relates to interviewing children. who may, if the parent is in the room, they may not want to look their parent in the face, because actually culturally it's considered disrespectful to look at your parents in the face. Not in all African cultures, because we're not putting all African countries in the same box, but certainly in other countries it is. And it's just about there's a few people, I'm so sorry for those who I missed their comments, but there are a few people who've mentioned around training. What training are the officers having? Things like the use of language as well. I always tell people this when I've been in the UK for 20 odd years, but when I first came into the UK, I would think in Shona, which is my language, and then translate to English when I'm then speaking out. And a lot of the times that can come out very different to what I mean. Not so much now, but that's the reality for most people. And how much of that is taken into consideration during interviews as well. It's a bit like a parent saying they smacked their child. Within the African context, a parent might say, I beat them, but they don't actually, and that context is very different to yourself, because beat sounds something a lot worse than maybe a little smack on the bum or a pat on the hand, which is what the parent might mean. But actually, how much of that do the police have awareness of to be able to ask further questions when a parent makes such a statement, for example?
Yeah, I think going off kind of that scenario, there isn't any training in terms of understanding that there's a different use of language or terminology that's being used, or like you say, body language, eye contact. That isn't something that we're trained on, and it should be, because like you say, if I was in that situation where I was in an interview and someone said, beating the child, initially I'm going, child right to the top, child abuse, that child is being subjected to violence, and clearly context is key. I think one of my takeaways from this whole process will be there's clearly a lot of learning that we need to be engaging in terms of our department, and that's something I'll be seeking out to see what kind of training opportunities are there for my officers to understand that there are these considerations that they're not even thinking about, and it's something that we need to look at, definitely.
Yeah. So we have come to the end, but Lady Changer, I can see you've got your hand up. Is it going to be a quick one? Because I'm sure Helen has a lot of work to do.
My laptop's on battery power, so it might go imminently, but
okay. Quick one, Lady Changer, and then we'll come to an end.
No, it's not a long one. It was You just said the point I wanted to say in terms of, I wanted to ask what sort of awareness do they have about our culture? Because one of the difficult things we have as well is there's a stereotype that says African parents, they're allowed. It's like when we speak, we are considered to be aggressive. Like we are not shouting, it's just we are trying to make our point, but we feel that it's classed as aggression, but we are just trying to be parents. So I feel like the police or whoever is working, whether it's social worker or any professional, maybe they need that awareness that in our culture, raising the voice is not always aggression. It's just that we are trying to differentiate between us as parents and children. Because sometimes I see it even on TikTok or in different programs, kids make fun of it. African mother did this, African mother. Then it comes across as if there is something wrong with that tone. So I was just adding on what you were saying, Chennai, that maybe that awareness is needed.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Just on that, I take two things from that. I take that we need to be engaging more in understanding, that people speak differently, people have different intonation. I'm obviously gesturing with hands. People communicate differently, and it's about officers having that understanding of how they interpret these things. Because I can absolutely imagine from reading logs from jobs that response officers have been out to, where they're trying to write something quick and they're just getting down the basic points. I can imagine them putting on there that the person I spoke to was shouting, was being aggressive, when they don't mean that. They just mean that the person was slightly louder than they're used to and was articulating themselves. But I can totally see that being a situation that would take place. So I think that's some learning for us in terms of not jumping to conclusions, I think that's we need to put some further support in place. I think it's also about officers just being patient and understanding, and officers, like we talk about those good officers and those bad officers. A good officer will be open to however the person wants to communicate and will do the best that they can, whereas I think a bad officer would absolutely write off, this person's loud and aggressive and make assumptions. So I think it's a part of, half of it is we need to be met with some training, some support, getting that knowledge out there, but also the onus is on the officers to approach situations fairly, and make sure that they're listening to people and not writing them off because of how they're communicating. So I think it's twofold, really.
Yeah. Oh, Ngoni, the time. Helen, I don't know, do you have time for one more question?
Yeah, go on, we can squeeze one more.
Last one. Ngoni, go on.
Sorry, it's not actually a question, but just maybe a comment you were going to add on tonight. But I actually think this is a start to something great, something that will, I think, help us integrate into like the country we moved in. So I know we've covered Midlands, but Chennai, I would hope this can spread to other regions like London, Scotland and stuff, like, just to make everyone aware. It's not like I think the feedback that we're getting from Helen, everything looks very positive. I think once we know how to work with each other, we shouldn't be scared of police. We should be running to police to get help because they are law enforcers. So we appreciate having them. But I think as migrants, sometimes because of this, the what we hear about how everything, I think we're getting educated on how actually police work. So thank you, Chennai, and thank you, Helen. And yeah, I've got lots more questions on the knife crime and the stop and search and whatnot for the Black boys.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. And someone has put in the chat that it's unrealistic to expect police to be trained in every aspect of cultural differences, and that there is a responsibility for us within the African community to also educate ourselves. And that's a very good comment, and which is why we have these groups. We are educating ourselves, but that happens when we are actually linking in with the police, which is also what we are doing. I think there needs to be a more joined up approach. It shouldn't be about them and us. The more we interact with each other, the more we understand how the communities work, and it works well for everybody. I don't think anybody wants children in care, and certainly having these conversations with the police will help with that. So thank you, Helen. Truly, truly grateful that you have spared your time to be here with us today. And thank you, everybody, for joining. It's been a real insightful conversation. Truly grateful. And Helen, I look forward to catching up with you again outside of this, and having further conversations, and hopefully inviting you for the second time.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. I've really enjoyed kind of getting everyone's perspectives. This is an area that I'm not kind of an expert in by any means, and I'm really enjoying kind of getting those perspectives and hearing those things that I wouldn't hear from otherwise. So thank you for kind of inviting me in, and absolutely, I'd love to attend any other sessions to kind of further that learning and kind of get more perspectives and see what we can do together. Yeah.
Definitely. No worries. Thank you all. Have a good evening. And thanks again, Helen. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you, everyone. Please fill in the feedback
form.
Bye. Fill in the feedback form. Any feedback for Helen, so that I can pass on the feedback, any suggestions that people have about how the police could improve sort of communications with our community, that would be really helpful. So put it in the feedback form and I'll pass on the comments to Helen. Thank you all so much for joining.
Thank you. Good night.